Welcome to Tech Ties and Human Vibes, where we explore the tech that powers modern businesses and drives innovation. I'm Adam, and with me is Nancy. We'll be talking to entrepreneurs, innovators, and industry experts about the tools they use, the challenges they face, and how technology is shaping the future of work. Let's dive in. Hey, I'm Adam with Tech Ties and Human Vibes. I've got my co-host, Nancy Henriquez, and
Hello.
Pete Evans. Pete, you're with Ventas Sales, if I'm saying that correctly. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about the company that you're with?
Yeah. So I'm from the UK. I live in the UK. I live in a town in the north of England called Ilkley, which is about 30 minutes from Leeds in the beautiful county of Yorkshire, in the north of England. And I run a business called Ventas Sales, and we specialise in working with growth-minded business owners that want to bring commercial excellence and rigour to their sales function. And we focus a lot on dealing with the challenge of having the right mindset for sales and revenue growth. And we have a lot of fun. We work with different types of businesses, from like tech startups with investors right up into the global space. And we look for clients that really want to grow their business and maybe go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset in sales.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. It sounds exciting.
We sometimes have challenges with clients, and particularly salespeople who don't want to change their mindset or say, well, I've been in sales for 10, 20, 30 years, what do I need to learn about sales? And I think that, when you have that sort of mindset, it leads to complacency. It leads to mediocrity because the world, as we talked about before, technology is a great enabler in sales, but actually sales, particularly in the marketplaces that we're dealing with, it's about human interaction. Business to business sales requires human interaction and the ability to build rapport and empathy and trust. So yeah, most of the time it's exciting.
So let me just ask you, what are 2 to 3 sales techniques that are typically overlooked in the world of sales?
Yeah, well, I'd like to say I'm 21, but I'm not. I've been in sales for a long time. And when I started in sales, there was no. I was 27. There was no internet. There was nothing like LinkedIn or the other digital channels we've got, or websites. Prospecting, for me was actually walking around industrial estates and picking up compliment slips with the telephone number of the office, asking the receptionist for the name of the owner, and if they had a direct line. So I think the things that we're missing are some of those fundamentals of sales. The ability to prospect consistently.
So kind of like going back to the basics.
Yeah, I think that's missing. I think it's great that we've got all these digital tools, but I think it's made salespeople complacent because there's almost too much information. And I actually think that in the UK we used to have something that was like a business directory. We called it Yellow Pages. So you had something similar in the US, but you would go through that and ring people up, and you would ask to speak to the business owner or the decision maker. You would pick up list of companies from like the local Chamber of Commerce, which is an organisation which supports businesses. You would have to go and network face to face. You'd have to find places where your target market, hung out. Different associations, and I think with all the technology we've got, in the old days, you followed up by ringing people up, and actually now what we hear a lot is, well, I have followed up with a prospect. Well, how did you do that? Well, I send them a message. I send them a message on LinkedIn or send them an email. Well, why didn't you phone them up? And I think what's happened is, particularly with the younger generation, they don't see the phone as a tool for having a conversation with somebody. they see it as a tool for running their social media life. So I think the fundamentals actually haven't changed. I think the ability to prospect, is a key skill. But I think what has changed is there are more tools to actually help you prospect, which can take away some of that hunger. I think the other thing, which is a fundamental, which really hasn't changed, is being consistent in your approach. So, you said, our business is exciting. It is. I think sales is one of the best jobs in the world because when you win and you win a new client or a new piece of business, it's really exciting. It gives you that adrenaline rush. But but when sales aren't going well, it's the toughest job in the world. And I think the consistency factor is doing the simple things well every day. They lead to the right results, and that hasn't changed. I think there's a third thing, if I may add. I think what
Yeah.
you also get with digital and social media is people posting saying, "Hey, I was on LinkedIn for a week and I did some posts and I got a $10 million deal." And they don't talk about actually nobody. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but nobody's ever messaged me saying, "Hey, I've got $10 million to spend on sales transformation, and here's the order." That there are a lot of steps to
We're
doing big deals.
we're looking for those people. So if you know where they're at, would you send them our way?
Right.
I, I'm not. I'm not greedy, Adam. I'll take 5 million, and you can have the other 5 million. Let's show. But the fundamentals haven't changed. You've got to, if you want to be successful at selling, you've got to show up every day. You've got to be consistent. You've got to have the right mindset, and you've got to prospect. These are fundamentals. They haven't changed.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Love
it
that.
is. It is going back to the fundamentals, going back to the basics of sales. But you can tie that in with modern sales as well, then, right? I mean, not just doing one over the other, but kind of doing them all.
Yeah, I think we're like the technology and the platforms we've got, you know, can really help you. And an example of this, particularly when you're dealing with, higher value sales, this is where tools like LinkedIn really come into, as part of your sales toolkit. Because if you're trying to sell to, company X, that company say turns over 50 million, and let's say you're selling like we are sales transformation, and we might be talking to the VP of sales. We can go onto LinkedIn and do research about that organization. We can see who else might be involved in the decision making process. And when you go to a discovery meeting with a VP of sales, you can say, "Hey, I've done some research. Adam is your chief financial officer or VP of finance. What's he like to deal with? What sort of information does he need?" You can even reach out and connect with the decision makers. Where years ago when I started in sales, it was really difficult to find out that information. So I think it's a blended approach. What I also think is that in terms of prospecting, like technology can enable you to have meetings like this where you can get the decision makers online on a Teams or a Zoom call, and also where your prospects might be procrastinating. They say, "Hey, we need Nancy to join the meeting." Or where's Nancy based? Oh, well, she's based in Hong Kong, and she's not back in the US for another 5 months. And you can say, "Hey, why don't we organise a time when Nancy can join us on a call?" So all these, the technology is a great enabler. I think it's brought massive advance. And I'm not sure we're going to come and talk about AI, but yesterday I was with one of my team, and we were talking about how AI can actually do some of your pre-meeting research.
Yeah, that's a
On
true
prospects.
statement right there. Yeah, I've done
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So,
Adam
so
and I were having the same conversation this morning, actually, how it enhances your abilities, right? And not replaces you, but more so enhances and allows you to do a much better job.
Yeah.
at what it is that you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think the key thing, Nancy and Adam, is if you're getting AI to do your research, you've still got to do your own preparation. So it's how they use the information that AI can give you about a prospect or an existing client, and when you go into a discovery meeting or presentation, you say to your prospect or client, "Hey, Nancy, I've done some preparation, I've done some research, but you ask intelligent questions based on that research that you've done.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you're not differentiating yourself from the competition."
Right. No, you're exactly right. And yeah, and like what Nancy and I were saying, how it enhances the person, whoever the person is, right? So if you're a really good sales guy, you can use AI, and it's just going to make you a better sales guy if you do it correctly, right? I'm more on the creative side, so it enhances my creativity,
Yeah,
makes me a better creator, and so I really enjoy that. Also cleans up a lot of my mess.
yeah, I would I would agree with that, and I think it's actually AI can probably do a lot of the grunt work of the sales process, but it's remembering that you're having you know human interaction with people, and I think that's the really key, the sort of the key thing. And actually, everybody these days has a smartphone, and this is something I talk about when I talk, um, do talks to CEOs and managing directors. I say, hey, your salespeople have got this fantastic piece of technology. It's a smartphone. Do you know it does one thing that'll make you stand out? You can speak to people on it. You can actually have a conversation, and you know I'm a
I
great
love it.
lover of technology and the digital space. I think it's amazing what it can do for us, in not just in sales but in all aspects of your business. But actually the key thing we've forgotten about is to have a conversation,
I love
and
that. I want to kind of take a step back and talk about the fundamentals, right? That we were discussing and the human element of it, less so about technology, just because we come from a world of technology. So we primarily work with managed service providers, and that's who our primary audience is. And so when I started as an MSP, I was very introverted, and I still am,
yeah.
introverted with practice. And so I know a lot of us struggle when it comes to sales and just having those conversations, opening ourselves up to have those conversations or ask probing questions or get to a point of being able to build a relationship with prospects. What is some of the advice that you would give to those that are like me back in the day, afraid to have conversations and things like that?
Oh, Nancy, this is a great question, and I love this topic because actually, when I was at school, I was very shy and introverted. So I think like a lot of kids, I didn't run around the playground going, "Hey, when I grow up, I want to be in sales." It was the last thing that I wanted to do. But I did do some selling when I was 16. If we've got time, I'll share that story at the end. But when I went to university, my degree was in Spanish, and then I graduated and I went to work for a major insurance company, and I had 5 or 6 great years with that company. I became the graduate recruitment manager, and then in a massive restructure, I was made redundant. And like a lot of people, I fell into sales by accident. Um, the company I was working for that made me redundant, they paid for me to have an external redundancy counsellor. He was a gentleman called George, and he used to come across from a beautiful town in the north of England called Harrogate to Liverpool, where I worked every Monday morning. And the first thing that he did was he got me to take the DISC or Thomas International profile. And he said to me, "Hey, Pete," he was a bit grumpy, he was in his 70s at the time, and he said, "Hey, Pete, you don't want to go back into like working in personnel or HR and in an admin type role. You need to get into speak to people. You've got the classic profile of a salesperson." So that's how I ended up going into sales. But coming back to what you said about being introverted, and this is really relevant, I went on the training course with the company I joined in sales, which was in financial service and investments. And I then came back to the branch. And after 4 or 5 weeks in sales, I went to my branch manager and said, "Hey, Vincent, this isn't for me." Because actually I felt so into place because I was more introverted than everybody else. And, there were there were no females at the time in the office apart from in sales support. So there were 15 other blokes, and I thought, I don't fit in here. This is an office full of testosterone. They're all extroverted, and I'm not going to make it. And Vincent sat me down and said, he said, "Have you heard the story about the tortoise and the hare?" And he said, "If you do everything I'm going to teach you, you will be successful." And he said, "Just because you're extrovert and you've got the gift of the gab and you can go to the pub or the bar and tell the jokes, doesn't mean you're going to be successful in selling." He said, "You've got a gift," he said, "listening." So what I learned, Nancy and Adam, is that when you're more introverted, you're more likely to listen to people because you feel you don't have to talk all the time. So it took me a while to get going. It took me 6 months in that company before I brought in a big deal. But
Oh, wow.
what I did learn, and I learned this off Vincent, and bless him, he's no longer with us. But the thing I learned off Vincent was, and coming back to some points I made earlier, he said, and he used to call me son. So he'd come in the morning, call me son, and he'd say, "If you do the right number of prospecting calls and you book, say, 8 to 10 meetings a week, and you do some presentation meetings on top, over time you will be successful." He said, he said, "If you do the activity first, then I can help you improve the quality." And he said, "I don't really care if you bring in one small sale a week." He said, "It's about developing not the bad habits." He said, "It's about developing good habits." So because I knew nothing better, I did that. I followed the activity. I asked for referrals. I followed the process of discovery and presentation. I wasn't always winning. And then somebody had said to me that when you're selling, particularly when you're selling to like in the personal financial services market, it's like going to a room and there's loads of light switches, and if you can discover which are the right one or two switches to turn on, it's bingo, you've hit the jackpot. And that that always stuck with me. So I think coming back to what you said about being introverted, what I learned was being more introverted means you'll listen more. And how many times do you go somewhere and somebody's trying to sell to you, and they what I call show up and throw up. They don't pay any interest to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And actually, I think being an introvert or more introverted is a real advantage. I think that is such a skill and listening. And these are things that we coach on about. Hey, the meeting isn't about you and your business. Your prospects are not interested in all the features and benefits of your product. What they're interested in is, can you identify their challenge, and then can you ask them enough questions that they feel they've actually got to buy something. So I think
Oh,
introverts
I
do that.
love that.
Yeah.
I love that. I'm like,
Yeah.
I love it so much. Can you repeat that?
You've got to ask enough questions that your prospect or client articulates the problem or challenge, and you've got also, even if they recognize you've got a problem or challenge, they've got to feel motivated to buy the solution, and they've got to have an emotional connection to that solution. Because
Yeah.
if you've got to
Oh yeah.
if you've got an emotional connection, you're motivated to buy.
It's true.
And
Very true.
and what a lot of salespeople are doing, and it's coming back to the technology, the over reliance on technology means they're not building that human connection.
Oh, yeah. And that's something that is prevalent in our industry. And we're trying to change that as part of what we do at Sybil is, making sure that it's not a focus on technology and that it's not a focus on your expertise and what you do and how you do it, but more so of the problems that you solve and how you solve them.
Yeah, and I think this is quite quite interesting. I think Nancy, you and I might have talked about this, but I'm going in hospital on the 16th of May for an operation, and and I went to see a consultant privately. Yeah, our sort of healthcare system is different to the US, so we have a national health service, and we can also go private. So we've got private. So my partner got private medical insurance. So I went to see the consultant, and I sat down, and he said, "So, Mr. Evans," I said, "Oh, call me Pete." They're quite formal in the medical sector in the UK, and he said, "So, what's your problem statement?" And I laughed, and he said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "Well, this is what I coach salespeople to find out what the prospect's problem statement is." And when I explained that to him, he said, "Well, there's no point me sitting here and not asking you what the problem is." And then he went on and said, and I told him what the problem is. He said, "Okay, I get that." And then I'd had a scan at another hospital, and he went on and said, "Okay." And then he said, "So what's the impact on your life?" And I think this is like somebody doing a really great discovery meeting on me. They're asking me what the problem is, and they're asking what the impact is, and then he said, so if we can solve this problem, what sort of outcomes are you going to get? What's he going to mean? What's he going to mean to you? And I was talking, talking about it, and this was really funny. He then said to me, "So you into data?" And I said, "Oh, we use data all the time with clients." And then he said, "Right, here are 7 options you could do." And then he showed me the data, and then he said, "Are you into innovation?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Okay, well, actually," he said, "I'm into innovation." And he said, he said, "The best option for you is this." And he said, "That involves robotics." And he said, "Your recovery time will be quicker. The longevity, the impact of this operation, which means you will have that of another 20 years if you don't." But it was just the way that he did it. It reminded me of, actually, I've gone in to see somebody who said, "What's your problem statement?" And I think what salespeople do is they dance around the handbags and they don't actually identify the prospect's problem.
Yeah, because if you walked in there and the doctor asked you, what's your problems, and you said you didn't have any problems, he'd probably say, "Well, I can't help you then. Have a good day."
Yeah,
But you're fine.
Yeah.
yeah,
You're fine then. Great.
and actually, Adam, you've highlighted something I think is really relevant to the world of sales and hasn't changed. Is I will often say at the start of a discovery meeting, "Hey, Nancy, great you've agreed to meet. Let's just check for time. You allocated 45 minutes to this meeting. Listen, I've done some research on your business, but what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you a lot of questions about your business. Where you're going, and the purpose of this is I want to identify whether our business is a good fit for your business. And actually, at the end of 45 minutes, if we are, then we'll talk about next steps. But if we're not, we'll shake hands and we'll walk away and we'll keep in touch, because
Yeah.
we may not be the best fit and the best option at this moment in time." And that, Bill, on what you said, I had an answer about, we've gone to see the consultant, said, "What's your problem?" I said, "Well, nothing." You'd probably just say, "Well, get out of here, you're wasting my time." But I think what we got to get better at is having the confidence that we don't have to sell something to every prospect. Being professional and walking away and saying, "Hey,
Oh, yeah.
at this moment in time, Nancy, when I don't feel we're the right fit for you."
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are not confident enough to say that. Because
Right.
Your prospects buy when they're ready to buy, not when you're ready to sell to them. You know.
Oh
So
yeah.
true.
That's always the
So
part that reminds me of dating.
Yes. Well, funny enough, I have and I'm sure this will resonate with you. I have an expression, sales, it is a bit like dating, and to find a prince or princess, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs. you know, you know,
That's right. And it goes both ways, right? The salesperson and the prospect. So it's not just
right.
on one end, it is on both ends where you are looking for that perfect fit. It's not just, like you said, it's not just because you're selling, you're going to find someone to buy immediately.
yeah. So some people are, window shopping, but again, I think this comes right back to the right back to the basics. In that prospecting or discovery phase, I will get to the end of the meeting, and they may have a problem, right? But there can be things that get in the way of them wanting to deal with us. One is they may not be motivated to take action. So if their motivation's low, however good our service is and the results we get, they're not going to buy. Or there could be other priorities. I will often say, so
Yep.
what are the challenges have you got in your got in your business? I mean, Nancy, you're dealing with, you're working with MSPs. That's only one aspect of a business. So the people in the MSP space, the whole technology piece, that might be one thing that the organisations they're selling to are dealing with. But if you're commercially aware as a salesperson and you can have a business conversation, you can actually ask the people you're selling to, okay, well, I'm intrigued. What? Why is investing money on sales transformation more important to you as a business at this moment in time than actually resolving all your technology problems? Yeah, and when you've
Mm,
got the confidence to ask that question, what it's showing is you're prepared to challenge. You know,
that's right.
and
In a way, you show that you care.
yeah, and it's having an understanding, and sometimes what it's also doing is saying, okay, so what budget is that money coming out of, or so if we could identify some areas how we could help you find that budget, would you be interested in talking? And I think that comes down to you know you don't have to be an accountant, but if you can understand the numbers of a business and how they make money, that will lead you to have a higher quality, more in depth conversation. Because what they'll think is, hey, Nancy came to see us today. She did this great discovery meeting. She maybe made us feel a bit uncomfortable. But the questions she asked were not just about her area of expertise. She asked us loads of questions about the business, and she was genuinely interested. And actually, she really seemed to understand business. Because I think that comes back to being a trusted advisor,
Yeah.
not a
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
not just a salesperson, but somebody who thinks, "Hey, I've got a bit of a challenge. I don't know whether Nancy's business does this, but I'm going to ring her anyway because she seems to know what she's doing."
Yeah. And like you
Yep.
said, a trusted advisor, right? You become more than just the salesperson, right? You become a crutch for them that you can help them.
Yeah, you become a center of it. You become a center of influence. And I think that's so so important. And I'd like to share an example of a client we've been working with over the past 4 months, and we've been doing some coaching, and I think this will really help the listeners. So we've been coaching these salespeople on how to ask much better probing questions, and the marketplace they're in there, they are the market leader. Sort of an innovation that's selling very high end capex equipment. But one of the, one of the challenges, they don't know the customers enough. So two of the sales guys went to see one of their existing accounts, and afterwards they rang me really excited and said, "Hey, we've asked the questions that you've been doing with you through the coaching." I said, "Great. So what did you uncover?" Well, a client went to see, we didn't know this, but they've grown from 15 million euros to 30 million euros in the last 4 years. And their plan is to grow from 30 million to 50 million euros in the next 5 years. And I said, so what does that tell you? Well, we didn't know our clients. So now you're facing competition from cheaper suppliers. How do you think you could use that information if you found out we can build a business case? We can be their trusted partner, and this isn't about being the most technically competent. I think this comes back to, if you understand business, you can move away from the price conversation to presenting value. And Adam, if I can circle back right to start when you talked about, the fundamentals and what's changed, selling value hasn't changed. There's always been price competition. There is always somebody who's prepared to come in and do it cheaper. But actually, if you're trusted, you will get less pressure on price and margin, because actually you can say to somebody, so this is your problem. Are you prepared to pay X to solve it? What would it mean to you if you solve that problem? And that's where I think, we need to get back to, because unfortunately, the internet has made us all experts allegedly experts in other people's areas. Because no disrespect to you, Adam, but I can go on to, ChatGPT and become a marketing expert overnight. I've no desire, by the way. You can get ChatGPT to come up with a sales strategy. This should probably be quite good, actually, it's about its implementation. So we've all become experts in other people's areas, but actually, I think professionals help other businesses save time and money.
Well, in that line of professionalism, we have a time limit that we set.
Perfect.
And so we have come very close to our time limit, Pete, and I don't want to take up any more of your time. No. So if you would, someone wants to reach out to you, can you tell us a good way for them to do that?
So a great way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. So if you go onto LinkedIn and type Pete Evans and Venta Sales, it will bring up my LinkedIn profile. That's a great way for people to reach out with me, and I'm more than happy to connect and have a conversation and chat all things sales.
That sounds great. Nancy, do you have any additional questions or anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Yes, I feel like you saw it. You felt my energy.
Yeah.
So Pete, I know that, and we've talked about this before, and I'm getting ready to take this assessment myself, and I'm excited to take this, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I feel is more empowering to salespeople or to professionals that are in a sales position, right? Because not all professionals that are salespeople are, not all professionals that do sales are in sales, right? And so not everyone identifies as a salesperson, but they may be doing the sales.
Yeah.
And so my question is, what is this assessment? How does it help that you guys do? And you call it OMG, so it's like, OMG, does it really help?
Yeah.
And I think knowledge is power. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, over the years, because I started my career in what was personnel, I've really been into different types of assessments to assess people's behaviors. And about 8 or 9 years ago, I stumbled across the tool of Objective Management Group, or OMG. And what the OMG assessment tool does is it evaluates 21 sales-specific competencies for people who are selling, even if they don't think they're in a selling role. But what it really does, it helps you understand where your mindset is in terms of sales. It helps you uncover hidden weaknesses, and I'll give an example in a moment. And it also tells you how good you are at some of the tactical selling competencies like hunting, presentation, qualification, consultative selling. So actually, the past 35 years, it has become the market leading evaluation tool. So it produces a personalized development plan. And I think one of the competencies is doesn't need approval, which tells you whether in a sales situation you need your prospects and customers to like you. So when I first did the assessment 8 or 9 years ago, my need to be liked was really high. And the person who gave me my feedback asked me a question, said, well, so your customers, when you're in financial services, did they buy all the products and services you could sell? And I said, no, they didn't. So this lady said, why? I said, well, I could have sold them all more, but I didn't want to upset them. And she said, there we are. There's a great example of you needing to be liked. And that's just one example. And what I've done is I've worked on that competency to help me become more courageous and challenging. So what the assessment does is it almost holds a mirror up to you and highlights things that you're not aware of, but your customers or prospects might be aware of them. And if I come back to the doesn't need approval, if you need to be liked, your prospects will view that as a sign of weakness and they'll start asking for discounts. And if you need to be liked, you're much more likely to discount, and you're much less likely to challenge the status quo. So if anybody wants to take a complimentary assessment and if they want to reach out to us, then we can make that available. Or Nancy, we can create a code for your listeners as well if you'd like us to.
Awesome. Oh, yeah. And for those that are interested, I'd be willing to share my assessment results. If anyone's interested, but I think that I need to hear from people to see if they're interested in seeing my result or not, and then go from there, right?
Perfect.
Well, that was my question. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about all things sales and how things have changed and not changed, and really the fundamentals that everybody should continue to work on, hone in on, sharpen those skills in order to, keep being successful in sales.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the conversation. I could talk all evening on this. So thanks very much for inviting me.
Well, thank you. And thanks for listening.